Good morning. Okay, so we want to pick up today where we left off yesterday. It's always a good place to start. And we had gotten into the math of mortgages a little bit and calculating interest over a certain period of time. We talked about the difference between accrued interest and interim interest. What did we say accrued interest was? Interest that's what? That's built up, right? Past interest. It's interest that's already happened. It's already built up. Whereas interim interest is interest that would happen in the future. So if you think about a closing, I'm kind of going to start to get your mind in the mindset of a closing statement. If you think about a closing statement, who would be paying interest between the buyer and the seller? You got two parties. One of them pays interim interest, one of them pays accrued interest on the closing statement. Who would be paying for the past? Would that be the buyer or the seller? The seller. And who would be paying for the future? The buyer. So the seller would pay what kind of interest on the closing statement? Accrued interest, and the buyer would pay interim interest. Are y'all sharing drugs this morning? Is it anything good? I mean, you feel left us at home? It's always a story, man. Where? Sure it is. Ibuprofen. The painkiller. All right, let's look at number 8. Number 8 was what you guys did yesterday before you left, right? That was the one you showed me before you left yesterday? And that was as simple as saying the payoff on that note was the $250,000 loan amount plus the interest that had accrued. So the payoff as of June 18th was $250,812.50. So everybody's okay on that? You did it before you left yesterday. We're all good with that? Okay? Because this is just getting you in that mindset of interest building up daily. Every day, I owe more money to the bank today than I owed yesterday. The only time is only one time a month when that number goes in the other direction. Every other day of the month, the amount of money you owe the bank does what? Goes up. And then you get to your payment and it goes what? Down. Because you pay the interest all the way down to zero, and then hopefully there's some money left over to apply toward the principal. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. So on number 9 is asking you to do the same thing. Calculate the payoff of a mortgage loan issued at 4.75% interest with a principal balance of $318,650 if the loan is paid off on the 20th of September. So let's think about a payoff. The payoff is going to be at least how much money? $318,650, because we owe that. So we know that's our starting point. We know we're going to pay off at least $318,650. And then what do we need to add to that? What are we adding to it? 20 days worth of interest. Does that make sense for everybody? So we need to figure out how much one day of interest is going to cost so we can add 20 days worth. Well, if we've got a $318,650 principal balance times 4.75% interest, that is $15,135.88 per year, correct? That's annual. So what do we need to do with that number? Not 12. We need 20 days, so we need to divide it down to daily. So what are we going to divide by? 360. And that's where you really have to pay attention. Do I need to divide by 12? Do I need to divide by 360? In this case, it's 360. So we get that down. That is $42.04 a day times 20 days. And we multiply that times 20 days. It looks like to me about $840 and some change. Does that sound about right? $840.88. And what are we going to do with that number? We're going to add it to the payoff, or to the balance, and that will give us our payoff. So plus $318,650 And to pay that note off on September 20th, we would need $319,490 and about 88 cents as a payoff number. Now what if we get delayed for a day? Is that number going to change? Which way is it going to go? Up by how much money? Another $42.04. Because there'll be another day's interest. If it closes sooner, it would be $42 cheaper. If it closes a day sooner. Generally speaking, the way they actually handle this on the closing, because we don't know exactly when the closing date is going to be, when you ask your bank for a payoff, or when the closing attorney asks your bank for a payoff, they usually get what's called a 10-day payoff. So what they do is they say, okay, what day are you going to close on? And then they add an extra 10 days worth of interest to that from there to kind of allot for when it might close. And then they will send you a refund of the difference. So they'll basically overpay the payoff, and then within 30 days you'll get a check back for the 6 or 7 days worth of interest that you didn't actually accrue. That's the way we really handle it, rather than trying to be so precise about it. Everybody okay? All right. All right, number 10. Number 10 says Andrew is obtaining a 5.25% interest rate mortgage loan for his $165,000 purchase. He's borrowing the full purchase price. His monthly PI payments on the loan are $911. Based on this payment, how much will be credited toward the principal balance of Andrew's loan on his first mortgage payment? So they want to know how much of that $911 goes toward principal. Well, talk to me about a mortgage payment. What gets paid first? Interest when we only have PI, like we do in this case. If we had PI-TI, what would get paid first? Insurance, and then taxes, and then interest, and then principal. We work our way backwards, right? Well, in this one, we only have PI payments, so of P&I, interest is going to get paid first. Does that make sense? So the only way we can figure out how much of this payment goes toward principal is to first figure out how much goes away as a result of the interest. Is that clicking for everybody? So can we figure the monthly interest on this note? Yep. So our T-bar says annual interest is going to equal our loan amount times our interest rate. All right? So our loan amount here is how much money? $165,000. And our rate is 5.25%. Okay? So we got a $165,000 note times 5.25%. That's $8,662.50 per year. Everybody okay with that? Now, that's annually. So what do we need to do with that number? Divide it by 12, because this is a monthly payment we're dealing with, so we need to divide that by 12. If we divide that by 12, we get monthly interest of $721.88, $87.88, doesn't matter which one you go with. Everybody okay with that? So, I'm starting from a point of having $911 for my total payment. The total PI payment is $911. And of that, the first thing I'm paying is $721 worth of interest. $721.88. And so that leaves us with $189.25 going toward our principal. Does that make sense for everybody? Feel pretty solid on that? Okay? I'm sorry?
Just 12 cents.
Oh, 12, I'm sorry. It's 12. You're right. I'm blind. Can't read a calculator. It's 13 cents. 12 or 13 cents. Sorry. All right. How about number 11? It says in question 10 above, what's the outstanding principal balance of Andrew's loan after that first monthly payment? Well, the principal balance is just going to be whatever we owed at the beginning of the month minus whatever amount we paid off. What did we owe at the beginning of the month? $165,000. and we paid off $189.13. And that's going to be $164,810 and about 87 cents is our new balance. Now, obviously, that's not going to be two separate questions on the test. That's all going to be the same thing, right? It's all going to be put together. But for our purposes, we're breaking it up just so you can see it in the pieces. Okay. Number 12. Travis purchased a home in Garner with a sales price of $175,000 and a 90% loan-to-value loan. What's the remaining principal balance of the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage after two principal and interest payments of $750 have been made on the loan? So this is going to be a little bit of a long question because they expect us to deal with 2 monthly payments. So we need some room to groove here. This is where you might want to take out like a whole sheet of paper because you're not going to have enough room on the worksheet to do it. All right? 2 payments is going to be a lot of work. Make sense? All right. So first thing we need to know is how much money we actually borrowed, because they did not tell us the loan amount here. What they told us was we were purchasing a house for $175,000 and we have a 90% loan-to-value loan. Can we calculate based on that the loan amount? Yeah, because we got a T-bar that says the value of the property times the loan-to-value ratio will give us the loan amount. So the value of the property is $175,000 and the loan-to-value ratio is 90%. Is everybody okay with that? Yeah? Yes? Okay. I'm sorry?
I'm not there yet. I'm typing it in the computer.
You're not there yet? Where are you?
I'm writing it down.
Oh, okay. So how much is my loan amount here? $157,500. Good. So that's our loan. So we know that. Because there's no way we can possibly know what the remaining balance is after 2 payments if we don't know what the starting point is. So at least now we know the starting point. Now, we know we're paying $750 a month principal and interest. Is all of that going toward the principal? Is $750 going toward principal? No. First, we have to pay what? The interest. So we need to, for payment number 1, and I'm just going to kind of number these out. Payment number 1, we need to calculate the interest on payment number 1. Because the interest is going to be different for every payment. So, number 1, we've got a $175,000 loan. Let me write it as a T-bar. We've got a $175,000 loan. I'm sorry, $157,500. Thank you. That's why I have Catherine here. She keeps me straight.
I just want to make sure I'm not wrong.
You are not wrong. All right, so $157,500 for the loan. And what's our interest rate? 4.5%. That's going to give us our annual interest of $7,087.50. Everybody okay with that? Now, that's a monthly payment we're working with, so what do we have to do with this immediately? Divide it by 12. And when we do that, we end up with $590.63 going toward interest in month number 1. Well, we know our payment started at how much money? How much is our total payment? $750, and we're losing $590.63 of that to interest. So the amount going toward principal in month 1 is $159.37 principal. Is everybody all right with that? Okay? Can we now calculate the loan balance after that first payment? It started at $157.5, and we paid off $159.37 of it. So we owe $157,340 and 63 cents. That's after payment number 1. Now what do we need to do? We need to do the whole thing over again, right? We got payment number 2 to deal with. So for number 2, we start with the same thing. Here's our T-bar for interest, but the difference is now our balance is not going to be $157.5, it's going to be $157,340 and 63 cents. Our interest rate is still 4.5%. 57,340 and 63 cents times 4.5%. Looks like 7,080. $40. 7,080, yeah, that was right. And 33 cents in annual interest. All right. If that's our annual interest, then what do we need to do with it? Divided by 12. Exactly. So we need to take that number, divide it by 12, and that gives us monthly interest of $590 and about 3 cents. Is everybody okay with that? So that's the interest in month 2. How much is our payment still? $750 is our total payment, and we're losing $590 and 3 pennies of that. And that's $159 and 97 cents. Is everybody okay with that number and where that number comes from? Are we now ready to calculate the balance after that second payment? Yep. Our starting point, and this is again, this is why I think it helps to just have a big clean sheet of paper so you got plenty of room to spread everything out. Because if you try to do this all in that little section on the test, the numbers are going to get jumbled together and you're going to use the wrong number. You see what I'm saying? You need to lay it out so you can see what you're doing. Because I'm not starting from 157.5. What number am I starting from here? 157,340 and 63 cents minus 159 and 97 cents. And that gives me a loan balance of 157,180 and about 66 cents. And that's after 2 payments, so that's my answer. Everybody okay with that? Now I have seen them on the test ask you to do this to 8 payments.
How many?
8.
I just take for it.
One, I'm kidding. I've never seen that. 2 is as far as I've ever seen them go. 2 is as far. It's usually 1, but I have seen them do 2. I have seen them do 2. I mean, obviously you could do it out of 8 payments. It would just take forever. It would take forever because you'd have to. The problem is you can't recycle the numbers because the interest and principal numbers change. Now, when you look at a question like number 13. Number 13 is essentially the same question. The difference is they only want to know 1 monthly payment. But what's the major difference here? They did not just give us a PI payment. They gave us what? a PITI payment. And so we have to get rid of more things to get down to the principal portion. Does that make sense for everybody? All right, so let's look at this question. It says her monthly PITI payment on her home is $22.42. I'm just going to make a note of that. $22.42 PITI for myself. Okay? I know that's an important number. All right. The loan is for an initial amount of $318,000. So they didn't make us calculate the loan amount at least. They gave us the starting point is $318,000. So we know when we start calculating interest, for example, we're starting with $318,000. And it's issued at a 6% annual interest rate, so there's my interest rate. Her annual property taxes total $31.80 on the home, and her annual homeowner's hazard insurance is $840. Based on this information, how much of Xenia's first monthly payment will be credited toward her principal balance? What's the first thing we need to get rid of here? What do we pay first of a PITI payment? We need to pay the insurance. Pay it backwards, right? Pay the insurance. So let's look at the insurance piece right here. Hazard insurance is $840 what? Annually. Well, this is a monthly payment. So what do you think we need to do with that annual hazard insurance? We need to divide it by 12. So we come down here and we take that $840 and divide it by 12. That means monthly, we're spending $70 on insurance. Does everybody agree with that? And that's going to come straight out of my payment over there. That $22.42 just got reduced by $70. Now what do we need to pay? What's next? Working backwards.
Taxes.
Taxes. So here's what they told me about taxes. Property taxes total $31.80 on the home annually. So we're going to do the same thing, except we don't want to do $840 divided by 12. We want to do $31.80 divided by 12. Is $265 a month in property taxes. Everybody okay with that number? So that comes also out of our payment. What are we down to now? We've paid the insurance, we've paid the taxes. Now what's it time for? The interest. We've got to pay the interest. We've got to get rid of the interest. So go back over here to my T-bar formula for interest. I got a $318,000 loan times 6% annual interest. That is $19,080 per year. And so this is a monthly payment. What do I need to do? Divide it by 12. It's $1,590. And that's also going to get subtracted from my monthly payment over here. Now I'm finally ready to figure out how much of that payment is left over for principal. So it's $22.42 minus 70 minus 265 minus 1,590. How much is going toward principal? $317, and our starting point was $318,000. So we go 318 minus $317. $317,683. Sound about right for you guys? Man, you're really doing something with that payment, right? Somebody feels like they're making a $2,200 a month house payment, and look how much it changed. Only $300 of that actually went to pay down their mortgage debt. And so you're going to have that as a discussion with somebody at some point. At some point, somebody's going to go, because people don't pay attention to what they owe on their mortgage. It gets automatically drafted. They don't pay attention. You know, so you'll be having a conversation with somebody talking to you about selling their house. Well, we bought it for like $200,000 10 years ago, so we probably only owe like $100,000 on it now. No, you don't. No, you don't. You're like more like 175. Because you really don't start to make a dent in that principal until you get about 12 or 13 years into a 30-year mortgage, because that's when you finally start to get over the hump of more of the payment going toward principal than going toward interest. So let me ask you this question. Knowing what you know about this payment now, that only $317 of it is going toward principal, would making even just one extra payment per year make a huge difference? Yeah. Think about it. One payment is $2,242, right? If you make one extra payment, how much of that is going toward principal? All of it. That's almost, what is that, 8 times? So you just did 8 months worth of damage with one extra payment. That can make a dramatic difference. Just FYI, so you don't need it for the test. Fact to keep in the back of your head, somebody makes one extra payment per year on a 30-year mortgage, they take almost 9 years off the term of the loan. They pay it off in 21.5 years versus 30. Makes that much of a difference. Just one extra payment per year.
Is that without the penalty of?
Without a prepayment penalty, right. And remember, the vast majority of loans do not have prepayment penalties. Now, you would not want to do that if you have a prepayment penalty. The real question will be, why do you have a loan that has a prepayment penalty at this point? Because I'm sorry?
Would they want to refi if it is?
Yeah, if they have a loan that has a prepayment penalty, they're going to be looking to refinance and get out of it anyway.
Yeah.
My granddad always said, get something you can afford and make a payment every 15 days. And now I know why.
It does take,
Why would you want to make a payment every 15 days? Or 2 a month?
it takes a lot of, when you start to look at how much interest is paid on these loans, yes, they are at low interest rates, but low interest on a really big number is still a lot of money. I mean, we're spending $1,590 a month here in interest. That is a lot of money. It sort of sickens you when you think about it, about how much money it really is. And that's why they call it debt service, because you are in service to that debt. And that's the reason we call that the debt service payment. Okay? Everybody feel pretty comfortable with calculating those balances after a payment or two? Good, good. All right? Go ahead and do number 14 then. You guys should be able to do number 14 on your own. Let's see where you are. I know you guys are looking at that projector, right? I'm just going to blanket it since nobody uses that side, right? Do you? I'll leave it on if you do.
No, but I can use it.
Okay. All right. All right. I told you we accommodate the OCD. There's nothing wrong with that.
Today, I don't know, everything's changing.
No, I'm just blanking it so I can do the work up here. I didn't know if I could turn it off permanently is what I was asking.
I'm kidding, it's fine.
I like those. They entertain me. What can I say? See if those numbers look familiar for you. You end up with $95.96 going toward principal on that first payment. As I calculated, $51 a month for the insurance, $302 a month for property taxes, and $1,151 and about 4 cents for interest. Did everybody get to those numbers? Good. And if you deduct all that from the $1,600 payment, you end up with $95.96 going toward principal. Of course, that's not what they asked us. They wanted to know what was the what? What was the remaining balance? And that would be your remaining balance, $324,904.04. No? You good? You look puzzled. So I'm asking.
I got 324, 879.
All right, so what numbers do you have that differ here? What do you got $51 a month for insurance?
Yes.
Okay. You got 302 for taxes. What'd you come up with for interest?
I came up with 1126.
Okay. Did you type 325 times 4.25%? Maybe keyed something wrong? Yeah, you got a key in mistake? Okay.
I put 13, 5.5,
Maybe you type 4.5% rather than 4.25%. Probably something like that. But you knew what you were doing. You knew these steps to go through, right? And that's the key, is knowing the steps to go through. All right, is everybody good? And that's one thing I would say to you, because when that happens to her on a test, what's going to happen is her answer's not going to line up with any of the answer choices, right? And when your answer doesn't line up with any of the answer choices, do not get down on yourself. Don't get frustrated and go, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. The first thing you should assume is that you just keyed something wrong. Does that make sense? Have faith that you know what you're doing. So the best thing to do is to go back and just rekey everything and check every number so that, just start working through them again. You've already got it written down, so you can just quickly rekey them and make sure you keyed them correctly the first time. Because that's the most logical thing that went wrong, is that you just typed something in wrong. We all do that, especially with calculators. Calculators don't have the most sensitive buttons in the world. And it's not like unfortunately, a calculator is not like an iPhone or something like that, where you can look back up and see what you typed in to make sure you typed it correctly. You pretty much just have to do it again. All right. Number 15. Interim interest. What did we say interim interest was? Interest when?
Just before.
In the when? Future. Interim interest is future interest. Accrued interest is past interest. Accrued interest is who on the closing statement? Seller or buyer? Seller. Interim interest is buyer. So both of them are always some portion of a month. When we did accrued interest, in fact, we started with accrued interest today. When we did accrued interest, that was interest from the beginning of the month until what day? Not the 30th. Go back to those questions. Accrued interest was from the beginning of the month until when?
To the next one.
Not till the next month. Go back to those questions. It wasn't until we haven't done anything. And see, this is a perfect example of you can't tune something out because we've moved on to the next thing. We're going to come right back to it. Look back at your own questions that you did first thing today. It's the last thing we did yesterday and the first thing we did today. When we did accrued interest, it was from the beginning of the month until when? Until a specific day they gave you, right? Until a specific day they gave you. What day do you think that's going to be in the real world? Closing date. It's going to be the closing date. The seller's going to pay accrued interest from the beginning of the month up through the closing date. And here's the reason. They're not going to be around to make a mortgage payment to cover that interest. Normally they would pay that interest with their next mortgage payment. They're not going to have a next mortgage payment. Does that make sense? The buyer has to do the exact opposite. The buyer has to pay interim interest. Now, if you truly understand accrued interest, then you will automatically understand interim interest, because it's exactly the opposite. If accrued interest is from the beginning of the month through the closing date, what do you think interim interest is? From closing date till end of the month. They are polar opposites of each other. That's what I mean when I say one is in the past and one is in the future. The date is going to be the closing date, and the seller's going to pay from beginning of the month up through the closing date. Buyer's going to pay for their new loan, closing date through end of the month. Does that make sense for everybody? Now, notice I said closing date twice. I said the seller pays from the beginning of the month through the closing date. The buyer pays closing date through end of the month. So which one of them is paying for the closing date? Both of them are. They're both paying interest on that day. Does that make sense? Even if they're using the same lender, the lender's going to get paid interest twice on that day, because they're going to get paid on the old loan going out and the new loan coming in. So, let's talk about the dates before we even talk about the math. May 12th. That's our closing day. So give me the dates of the interim interest charge here. From what date to what date? May 12th through May 30th. Because they all have what? 30 days. May 12th through May 30th. Now, before we go any further, and I do this with every class, every time I've ever taught this, I don't want you to say it out loud. I just want you to write down somewhere on a piece of paper, and I'm going to walk by and look how many days there are from May 12th through May 30th. Just write that number down. I'll walk around and take a look. That would be incorrect. That would be incorrect. That would be incorrect.
Okay, now I don't feel so bad.
Where you at? That would be correct. That is correct. That is correct. What you got, bud? That would be incorrect. That would also be incorrect. That would be correct. 19 days, folks. It's 19 days. You are blessed with fingers and toes. It would be a good time to use them. Because if you do 30 minus 12, what number do you come up with? 18. The problem is that doesn't count the 12th. They have to start on the 12th. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. It's 19 days. It's not 18 days. And here's why I have to do that. I do that to make a very vivid point. You can do all of this math right. You can understand the concept. Are they evil enough to put an answer on the test that aligns with you doing 18 days instead of 19 days? Yes, it will be there every single time. So you have to remember, and it's only true when you're doing interim interest. It's the only time you run into this problem, because interim interest is the only time you're working into the future. Does that make sense for everybody? It's the only time you're working into the future. It's really easy to do accrued interest, because May 12th, how many days of accrued interest would there be? 12. But it's not 18 worth of interim, it's 19. Because they're both paying for what day? 12. They're both paying for the 12th. So in theory, when you add the two numbers together, they should always add up to be what? 31. Because they're both paying for the closing date. Does that make sense for everybody? So, so one way you could do it if you wanted to for interim interest, if you don't want to do the counting, you could always subtract from what number? From 31. You can always just, don't do it for anything else. But for interim interest, if you want to remember, just for interim interest, subtract from 31, you'll always have the right answer. Because even though they're only 30 days, that one day is getting paid for twice. It's getting paid for by two separate people. It overlaps. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay? And that's just for interim interest, not for any other thing that we prorate or split up. It's just for interim interest. So now, can we do 19 days worth of interest on that note? All right, let's do A together, and then I'll let you do B separately. So on A, if I'm going to do 19 days worth, well, I need to first figure out what 1 day would cost. So I've got $172,000 mortgage at 5.5% interest, and that comes up to be $3,960 annually. No, it does not. There's no way. As soon as I said that number, I was like, there's no way it comes out to be that. 172. I must have typed to 72. How about 9460? That sound more like it? That's what I said the first time. You just didn't hear me. Divided by what? Divided by 360, because we want to break it down to daily. And that is $26.28 per day. Times how many days? 19 days. $499.28, thereabout. If you're a few cents one way or the other, that's fine. But that would be your interim interest charge, and so the buyer's going to pay that much on the day of closing for interest for the remainder of that month. Now, from the buyer's perspective, think about it. Everything's opposite from the buyer's perspective as the seller's perspective. With the seller, if we had a day that we got delayed in closing, what happened to their interest charge? Did it go up or down? A delay in closing for the seller. Accrued interest. Do they owe more or do they owe less? We got delayed. They owe more. What's the buyer going to owe? Less, because if we have a day delay in closing, the seller's paying an additional day of accrued interest, but the buyer's paying 1 day less of interim interest. Does that make sense? So, here's a practical question for you. It's not an exam question, but it'll help you answer exam type questions. If you have a buyer who's tight on cash, they're really watching the numbers to make sure they have enough cash to close. When should you schedule the closing? End of the month. Because is this going to make a dramatic difference in how much cash they have to bring to closing early in the month versus late in the month? If you close on the 2nd, you've got, what, 29 days worth of interim interest charges? Whereas if you close on the 29th, you've only got 2 days. So that's going to be a huge difference in the level of closing costs for the buyer. Everybody okay with that? All right? Go ahead and do B. You do it. I'll give you a second. Does that look $946 and some change, about 96 cents, thereabout? Yeah, what?
I'm off by a few pennies.
Yeah, but don't matter. Don't matter. Pennies don't matter here. As long as you're not off by a day.
So I got 947.
Go for it.
04.
There you go. Oh, what I say? Pennies don't matter.
Well, okay.
They don't.
All right.
Stop.
All right.
Just stop. Get out of your head because you're going to have to deal with that on the test. You're almost no two people will calculate the same answer on a closing statement because there's always some level around it. Here's why mine's a little bit more than yours probably. Because I got 3382. It's not exactly 3382. It's 33.818 blah, 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 and I took it out of the calculator. If you left it in, you'd be a few cents off. The thing is, there's not going to be a different answer on the test because it's going to say rounded to the nearest dollar. So what's the answer going to be? 947. Whether it's yours or mine, it's 947. So don't stress about that part of it. And that's a major thing. I get it. We all would love to see the exact number to the penny. It's not going to work that way, especially as we get deeper into closing statements. Are we all good on that? Basically $33.82 a day times 28 days. As long as you were somewhere around $947, you did it right. Okay? Look at number 16 and 17, and then we're going to switch back over to the slides and pick up the lecture again for a second. But 16 and 17, even though they deal with the next topic, don't really require the slides. I'm trying to demonstrate for you how silly you're going to be about the next topic. Because the next topic we're going to talk about is one of those things where you all want to pull out a slide rule and an abacus, and you need like a differential curve to try to answer the question. And they really are simple questions, but you get caught up thinking they are hard, and they're not. Look at question number 16. It says, Jenna borrows $1,000 from a friend and agrees to repay the loan at a rate of $100 monthly for a total of 12 months. How much total repayment will she make? Well, how would you calculate that? You would say, surprisingly, 100 times what? 12. So she's going to repay $1,200, right? You see that and you think, there's no way I can screw that up on the test. Oh, I will show you in a minute how you can screw that up on a test. And then look at number 17. In the above question, how much is interest? $200. And how do you know that? Because they repaid a total of what? $1,200. And of that $1,200, 1,000 of it was what was borrowed. Does that make sense? So we have $200 in interest. And I know you say to yourself, I will never mess such a thing up. Yes, you will.
I did exactly that and thought, that can't be right.
That is exactly right. That is exactly right. Because what we want to talk about now, if you'll pull your slides back out from yesterday, we want to talk about two different things. We want to talk about amortization factors, and then we want to talk about interest paid over the life of a loan. Those two questions that we just did dealt with interest paid over the life of a loan. Did that loan we just worked with have interest on it? Yeah. What was the interest rate? We don't know. You know why? You don't need it. You don't need the interest rate to know how much interest is paid over the life of the loan. Because it was very simple to figure how much total money was paid over the life of the loan, and then you just subtracted what? The amount that they did what? What did we subtract? The amount that they borrowed. If you take the total amount paid in over the life of the loan and you subtract how much of that was borrowed, the remainder must be the what? The interest. I know you're sitting there going, this guy's crazy. He thinks I'm going to mess that up. I'm not. You are going to mess it up. Because as soon as I say, Travis borrowed $372,000 at 6.5% interest on a 30-year fixed rate note, and his monthly payment was $852 a month, how much interest did he pay over the life of the loan? You think you have to sit there and take the loan amount and multiply times the interest rate and all that? No, you do it exactly the same as you just did it. What did you do? You took the monthly payment and you multiplied it times what? times 12 because you're making 12 of those a year. And then if you were making them for 30 years, what would you multiply by? 30. Wouldn't that tell you how much you've paid in total on the loan? And couldn't you then just go and subtract out how much was borrowed? That's interest paid over the life of a loan, folks. It really is that simple to calculate something like that. I give you that kind of a question to get you out of your own head. Sometimes you really do make it harder than it is. And we're going to come to that in a second, and hopefully when we get there, you're going to be like, oh, okay, that's not hard at all, because it's really not. None of this is hard. What makes it seem hard is these are big numbers. That's what makes it intimidating, is the fact that they're big numbers. None of this stuff in this chapter is really hard to deal with. Would you agree with that so far? Like even the loan and figuring out how much goes toward principal. Just because they're big numbers, don't be intimidated by them. So we need to deal with something called a loan factor. I'm going to ask you to do something I never do. Pull out your textbook. Page 449 in your textbook has a loan factor chart. Page 449 has what we call a loan factor chart, or an amortization chart. An amortization chart. Okay? Which in and of itself looks intimidating. It's not. Here's what those numbers are. Those are loan payments. And they're just principal and interest payments on a $1,000 loan. Every number in that chart represents a $1,000 loan and how much you would have to pay monthly on that $1,000 loan if you borrowed it at this interest rate for this amount of time. Does that make sense for everybody? You see what you're looking at? So like for example, could you look up what the monthly payment is on a 30-year 5% mortgage? Find 30 years. Find 5%. Find where they intersect. You might need a piece of paper. It's hard because they're small numbers. What does it say there? How much? 5.37? Does everybody agree with that? I'm not looking at the chart, so is that right? 5.37? 5.37 what? Marbles, bananas?
Percent.
No. It's a payment. Dollars. $5.37. That's all that number represents. That's the payment on that loan. A whopping $5.37. But for how much of a loan? $1,000. If you only borrowed $1,000, what would your payment be? There's no math involved. You just look at the chart. What's your payment? $5.37. So let me ask you a question. If that's the payment on $1,000, what do you think the payment would be on $2,000? Times 2. $10.74, right? What would the payment be on $5,000? You would take that number and multiply times what? Times 5. What would the payment be on $50,000? You take that number and multiply times 50. What would the payment be on a $172,000 loan? Take that number and multiply it times what? 172. It's no harder than that to deal with an amortization factor. All it is a payment for every $1,000 that's been borrowed. Can you calculate anybody's mortgage payment on the fly if you've got that chart? Because all you need to know are 3 things. You need to know, number 1, what's their interest rate? Number 2, what else do you need to know? Their term, how long, whether it's a 15-year note or a 30-year note, right? And then number 3, how much they're what? How much they're borrowing. How much they're borrowing. If you know those 3 things, you can instantly look at that chart and calculate somebody's payment. So I want you to do this. On the fly right now. I want you to tell me what payment would be for a $5,000 mortgage. $6.5% interest. 15 years. All right, talk to me. What's the amortization factor? What's the payment factor? How much? 871. And that's for every what? $1,000 we borrowed. How many thousands did we borrow? 5, right? All we want is whatever's in front of the 3 zeros. So one way to think about it, could I take this number and divide it by 1,000? Yeah. Could I take this number and just drop off 3 zeros? That work too? Yeah. So 871 times what? 5. What's our monthly payment?
43.
43 how much? 55. Does everybody agree with that? Does that number make sense? What'd you do? Talk to me.
Not bad.
Well, talk to me about what you did though.
So, okay.
Walk me through the process.
So for every 1,000,
Mm-hmm.
except for 5 years.
No, I said 15 years. Here's the thing. The only thing you need this for is to get this number. You're done with that now. Now all that matters is how many of these you're paying. This is for every $1,000. Stack them up in front of yourself mentally. How many stacks of $1,000 did I borrow?
5.
Okay, so how many times am I paying $8.71? 5 times. If I borrowed $10,000, how many stacks would be in front of you? So how many times would you multiply that number by? Times 10. If I borrowed $150,000, how many stacks of 1,000 would be in front of you? 150, and every stack of 1,000 I got to pay $8.71. So it'd be 871 times what? Times 150. You with me now? Okay. See, once you get it in your brain, is it not the simplest concept in the world once you get it in your brain? You have to get there with it, but once you get it, you're like, okay, so it's just times however many thousand they borrowed, right? It's a payment per 1,000. Is everybody good with that? Okay. So then look at this example. It says a borrower obtains an 80% loan-to-value loan at 6.25% interest for 15 years in order to purchase a $325,000 home. Based on the above information, what's the monthly principal and interest payment on the loan? Well, if you look on the chart on page 449 and you look at 6.25% interest, and then you find, so once you get to 6.25, which is 6 1/4, right? And then you go over to the 15-year column. What loan factor do you see there? 857, right? So it's going to be 857 times the number of thousands we borrowed. Well, we don't know how many we borrowed yet. We have to figure that out. Does that make sense? Because they told us it's a $325,000 home with an 80% loan. So 325 times 80%, that's a $260,000 loan. So what are we going to be multiplying that loan factor by? 260. Because we're borrowing 260,000, so we're multiplying times 260. So there you go right there. $8.57 times 260. That's a monthly payment of $2,228.20. Now that's only for principal and interest. That doesn't take into account taxes and insurance. You know, in the real world, if you were, but now here's the thing, and this is why this is still so helpful. We used to carry this around in our pocket, by the way. When I first got into business, we carried this in our pocket because we didn't have smartphones with mortgage calculators on them. And so we needed to be able to calculate how much somebody's monthly payment would be. Here's why I want to show you why this is still useful for you even when you got a mortgage calculator in your pocket. Interest rates right now are about 4.5. Okay, so find the 4.5 line. 4.5%. Most people get a what kind of term mortgage? 15 or 30? 30. So go over to 30 years. What's the loan factor or amortization factor? 5 how much? 507. So basically $5, right? Is everybody with me on that? If you were out showing houses and you just showed one house that was listed at 175 and you show them another house that's listed at 200 and they go, I don't know, I mean, is the payment going to be a lot more on that? Could you on the fly tell them how much more their monthly payment's going to be for one versus the other? Yeah, because it's basically how much per thousand? $5, right? Pretty much $5. You don't have to be that exact. You're just giving them a quick answer. $5. And how many thousands are different between 175 and 200? 25. So couldn't you just quickly in your head do 25 times 5? How much is that a month difference? $125. That would be the difference. And you will look like a rock star genius to your client by simply being able to do that. And you don't have to walk around with a chart in your pocket. All you got to know is that, well, it's probably going to be about $5. Because right now interest rates are about what? 4.5, and they're probably going to be doing a 30-year mortgage. So all you got to do is walk around with the knowledge that for every $1,000 they go up in price, they're paying an extra how much per month? $5. You go up $10,000, it's an extra $50 a month. In fact, you could even look at them. Could you empower them with the information and say, for every $10,000 you go up, your house payment goes up $50. They'll be blown away. They'll think you literally wrote the book when it comes to real estate. But that's the power of an amortization factor. Does that make sense for you guys? Okay? So this is one of the reasons, this is one of the areas where I think technology has actually hurt us a lot, because this was, when you had to do this on a daily basis, we were actually much more useful to our clients because we were able to give that kind of advice on the fly. Now agents have to fumble around and take out a mortgage calculator, and they end up not giving the advice because it takes too much work, because they were never taught the old-fashioned way. And I'm not one of those you got to do it the old-fashioned way people. I love technology, but I think in this case technology has actually limited us significantly because we don't think about loan factors anymore. Is everybody okay with this? Okay, being able to handle this? So, the whole purpose of a loan factor, or amortization factor, they mean the same thing. Amortization factor, you make sure you know that terminology. The loan amortizes at this. It's just one of these loan factors. It could be stated in that way as well. The whole purpose of it is to calculate a what? A monthly payment. That's the whole purpose of it, is to calculate a monthly payment on a loan. That's it. Now the downside is, for test taking purposes, you do have to memorize the chart. So that's the hard part. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. They give you the chart. They either give you the chart, or most likely what they'll simply say in the test question is the loan amortizes at $8.71 per thousand. Okay, are we good on that? Okay, that little piece of math? Good. Discount points are one of those things that people love to hate. And they love to hate them largely because they make them more complex than they really are. What's a discount? You pay less what? You pay less money. Don't make it about loans, make it about real wealth. A discount is you pay less money. Now let's talk about making it about a loan. What money do you pay for a loan? What's the fee for a loan? The interest. So what do you think a discount point is discounting? It's lowering the interest that you would pay every month on the loan. It is simply a discounted interest rate. Now, are banks going to give you a discounted interest rate because they like you? No, they don't. Do hotels sometimes give you a discounted rate?
Yes.
Yes. Generally, if you do what? Stay with them a lot. What else might they give you a discounted rate for? You ever gone on a website that says, if you pay now, you get it at this price, or if you pay when you check in, you get it at another, and the pay when you check in price is what? Is higher. Or if you lock it in now with no ability to cancel, you get it at a cheaper rate than if you book it and still have the ability to cancel and get your money back. Does that make sense? So in other words, when you're willing to commit to paying for something up front, you can usually get it what? Cheaper. That's a discount point. A discount point is basically you're having a negotiation with your lender and you're saying, I would like a lower interest rate. And the lender is happy to accommodate you. But does that lower their earnings on the loan for the next 30 years? They make less money. If they lower your interest rate now, they make less money. Does that make sense? In exchange for what? What do they want? What did the hotel want? They want their money now. They want it in advance. And that's what a discount point is. It's paying interest in advance in exchange for paying less of it. Does that make sense for everybody? It's prepaid interest, but it's discounted prepaid interest. We will give you a lower interest rate, and you'll pay that lower interest rate for the whole 15 or 30 years, whatever you borrowed this money for. But we want some interest now up front. It's less than you would pay if you kept the normal interest rate, so you're saving money, but you're paying the money when? Now up front. What happens if you refinance? What happens if you refinance? Do they give you some of that money back? No. What happens if you sell the house? Do they give you some of that money back? No. So, discount points only make sense if you plan to do what with that loan? Keep it for a very long time. Now, will discount points save you substantial money if you keep the loan for that full 30 years? Absolutely they will. Will they burn you a new butthole if you refinance that thing after 5 years? Absolutely. Because you've paid more up front than you would have paid if you had just kept the interest rate normally for 5 years. Does that follow it? The magic number is 8. It takes 8 years to catch up. Generally speaking, they're charging you up front the amount of interest you would have paid in the first 8 years for the discount. Now, if you keep it years 9 through 30, are you ahead now? Yes, because at that point the interest you've paid on the loan is less than it would have been if you hadn't done the discount points. But for the first 8 years, you're actually in the hole. Because if you look at the interest you're paying monthly plus what you paid up front, you've paid more money than you would have paid. It takes 8 years to catch up with discount. Are you following me on this idea? Do you have a question?
No, well, I hear all the time on that middle lending commercial on the radio where they say, no closing costs. And pay closing costs, it's like an 8-year break even.
Yep.
I don't really understand. Is that kind of the same?
It is the same thing because they're doing the opposite. Just like you can pay the bank some money up front in exchange for them discounting your interest rate, they can pay you some money up front in exchange for you doing what over the course of the loan? If you pay money up front and it lowers your interest rate, what does it do if they give you money up front? It raises your interest rate. See, the biggest lie that's ever been told is a no closing cost loan. There's no such thing, folks. Loans have closing costs. All those people that work putting that loan together do not work for free. And they are not going to sit around for 30 years and wait for you to pay interest for them to get paid. They get paid based on closing costs. A no closing cost loan is actually a loan where you've gotten a credit from the lender. Rather than you paying them interest up front, they've paid it to you and allowed you to use it to pay your closing costs. But what have you agreed to accept in exchange for that credit up front? A higher interest rate. So you need to understand, interest is negotiable. You don't have to accept an interest rate. It's a negotiation. But what's going to depend on the negotiation is how much you're willing to pay right now up front. If you're willing to pay a bunch of cash up front, can you get pretty much any interest rate you want? Sure you can. but you got to decide if it's worth it. If you don't want to pull any money out of your pocket right now, what do? You pay the higher interest rate. Does that make sense for you? That's a discount point. So when you hear that on the radio, essentially what they're saying is, why pay your closing costs? Let us pay your closing costs. If you keep this loan less than 8 years, you come out ahead. Because it's just a discount point done in reverse. That's all it is. All right? Is everybody following on the idea here of a discount point? Now, we got two numbers we have to talk about with discount points. They are considered prepaid interest. They're non-refundable. They're paid up front. This last bullet point says they raise the lender's yield. Well, aren't the lender and the borrower on opposite sides? Aren't they? Yeah. So if they raise the lender's yield, what do they do to the borrower's interest rate? Opposite sides. They raise the yield, they lower the rate. The yield is what the lender is going to make on the loan. And they are making more money because you're paying them when? Up front. So they raise the lender's yield, they lower the borrower's interest rate. Now we need to talk about how much they cost. Because if you just tell somebody, well, we can charge you a fee to lower your interest rate, what is the natural next question they're going to ask? How much is the fee? And this is where the math of discount points comes in. The fee is 1% of the loan amount. A discount point will cost you 1% of the loan amount. Every discount point, all the time, costs 1% of the loan amount. So if I'm buying 4 points, how many percent of the loan am I paying? 4%. Up front. Now you think about it. That is a whoppingly big number, right? If I'm taking out a $300,000 mortgage and I'm buying 4 discount points, that's $12,000 out of pocket up front to get a slightly lower interest rate. Does that make sense for everybody? So each point is going to cost. So here's an example. Here's, for example, a borrower who purchases 1 discount point on a $200,000 loan would pay $2,000, and they pay that on the day of closing. It'd be part of their closing costs. And where's that $2,000 going? Straight to the lender. Straight to the lender. So they've made $2,000 in interest before they ever even what? Loan you the money. It's prepaid interest. You have written them a check for $2,000 so that they can loan you $200,000. That's a discount point. Now, you have to ask yourself, what am I getting in return for that $2,000? What presumably is going to happen as a result of this borrower paying this $2,000 up front? The interest rate is going to be what? Lower. So, you're the shopper. You ask the first most natural question, how much does it cost? Right? What's the next most natural question? What's my rate? What do I get in exchange for that $2,000? What do I get if I pay this money? Forget discount points. That's the problem. You won't attach it to something that you do in your daily life. If you walk in a shoe store and they said, man, you can get laces that you don't have to tie yourself. Are you interested in those? What's the first question you would ask? How much are they? Boom. Right? And then the next question would be, well, what do they really what? What do they really do? Aren't those the two natural questions you would ask about something? Well, the first question we just answered. How much are they? How much is a discount point? 1% of the loan. Now, what's the next logical question? What does it do for me? Show me what it does for me. Okay, you told me lower interest. I get that, but how much lower? If it's going to cost me $2,000, I need to know how much lower my interest rate is going to be. Would you agree with that? We can also tell you exactly how much lower that interest rate is going to be. The interest rate is going to be 1/8% lower. 1/8%. You're paying notice I said it takes how many years to catch up? 8 years. That's why it's 8 years. Because you're paying 8 times what they're giving you in return. You're paying 1% and they're giving you a break of what? 1/8%. Now, that's a great break if you actually keep that loan for 30 years. But if you don't, what's the average time somebody stays in a house? 7 right now. And even the folks that stay in their house for 7 years, do they keep the same mortgage for 7 years? Because if you refinance, haven't you reset the clock? So if you refinance this thing after 3 years and you paid a discount point, you were a sucker. Because you paid them a full percent, but you only got 3/8 worth of benefit out of it, right? Think of it that way. You're only getting 1/8%, and you only did it for how many years? 3 years. They made out like a bandit on you. Does that make sense for everybody? So, how much does it cost? It costs 1% of the loan amount. That's easy to figure, right? But the effect is 1/8%. So it's not, so if I have a 5% interest rate loan, and I want to buy a discount point, how much am I going to pay for that discount point? No. If I have a 5% interest rate loan, and I want to buy one discount point, how much is that discount point going to cost me? 1% of the loan amount, because that's what it always costs. 1% of the loan amount. We don't know because you can say loan amount. Does that make sense? But it's always 1% of the loan amount. So let's say it's a $100,000 loan. How much is that point going to cost me? $1,000. $1,000. The question is, how much is my interest rate going to go down? It's going to go down what? 1/8%. So it's not going to go down from 5% to 4%. It's not even going to go down from 5% to 4.5%. It's not even going to go down from 5% to 4.75%. It's going to go down to 4.875%. The reason I know that is 1/8 happens to be 0.125. If you type 1 divided by 8 in your calculator, that's 0.125. That's the change in the rate. It's 0.125. So if you wanted to go figure out how much that 5% interest rate changes, you would say 5% minus what? 0.125. 5 minus 0.125. And that would give you 4.875. Does that make sense? That's the new rate. Because the charge is a full 1%, but the change is 0.125 or 1/8%. Welcome to the wonderful world of lending. Do I recommend you buy the discount points? Well, I can't, the question, yeah, there you go. See, I can't just give an automatic answer to that. The question really becomes, how long are you going to keep, not even how long you're going to be in a house, how long are you going to keep this mortgage? How long do you think you're going to keep this mortgage? Now, if somebody's getting a fantastic rate that you really don't see interest rates going down in the foreseeable future, you know, like let's say they're getting a 4% interest rate already, right? And you don't think there's any way interest rates are going to go down, and this is their dream home, they're going to be there the rest of their lives, they see no reason they're going to be selling. Would that maybe be somebody who's a good candidate to buy discount points? Yeah, because there's a very high likelihood that they're going to keep that loan longer than 8 years. But if they're a young couple who just got married, they don't have kids yet, but they're planning on having a family, are they a good candidate for discount points? No, because most likely they're going to do what pretty soon? Move. Get a bigger house, have kids, have a bigger house. That 3-level townhouse ain't gonna work when you're dragging babies up and down them steps. You know, that gets old quick. Okay? Are we understanding the basic concept here? Because I find if you can get the concept, then you can get the math. All right? So I'm gonna back up to the math example here. It said, how much would be charged for discount points at closing to a borrower who's purchasing a $150,000 home with a 90% loan-to-value loan and purchasing 2 discount points? Now, how much does each discount point cost? 1% of what? The loan amount, not the sales price, but the loan amount. So the first thing we need to know here is the loan amount. Does that make sense for everybody? And that's what the math you've got right here is. $150,000 times the 90% loan-to-value ratio gives us a $135,000 loan. Everybody okay with that? So we got a $135,000 loan. And then how many points did it say we were buying? 2. So that's 1% for each one, or $1,350 for each one, times 2 points is $2,700. Now, I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you do $135,000 times 1% and figure out that a point costs $1,350 and then multiply times 2 to get $2,700. Or could you just say 135,000 times 2% would be the same thing, because each one costs 1%. So 3 points would be times 3%. You know, so whichever way I usually do just times 1%, 2%, 3% because it's one less step, right? Everybody okay with that? So that's the charge. Now let's look at the rate change. It says Zelda is purchasing a home and wishes to lower her interest rate from 6% to 5.5%. My dog was probably staring at me when I wrote this question. Okay. How many discount points will be required to accomplish this goal? So here's the first question. How much does she want the rate to change? 0.5, right? And that's what this math is right here. The rate was 6, and she wants it to be what? 5.5. So she wants it to change 0.5. Does that make sense for everybody? Well, 0.5 divided by how much each point changes the rate, because each point is worth what? 0.125 tells us we would need what? 4 points. Could you put that together like with the previous question, for example, and say, well, if they need 4 points and each point costs $1,350, could you then multiply times 4 to figure out what the charge would be? And that's where you put it all together. So here's one that puts it all together. It says Barney's purchasing, I know I was looking at my dogs now because Zelda and Barney on the next screen, they must have been staring at me in the office. Barney is purchasing a home for $425,000, obtaining an 80% loan to value, 30-year, fixed rate loan at 5% annual interest. In order to get this rate, he was required to purchase discount points, buying the rate down from 5.25%. Based on this information, how much is Barney charged at closing for the fee? Well, we know the fee is always going to be 1% per point purchased. Does that make sense? Because it's always 1% of the loan for every point we purchase. So the real question is, how many points do we have to purchase? Is everybody good with that? Okay. So in order to do that, we need to figure out the change. Okay. The change was from 5.25 down to what? 5. So 5.25 minus 5, our change was 0.25. Does that make sense? And how much does each point change that rate? 0.125, which is why we divide by 0.125. And that tells us we need to buy how many points? 2 points. We need to buy 2 points. What you'll start to notice if you do enough discount points questions is you can almost memorize and know how many points it is just by looking at it. This is 1/4%, right? Well, 1/4% is always going to be 2 points. 0.5% would be how many points? 4 points. A full percent would be 8 points. 3/4% is 6 points. You just learn to recognize them. Now, you can do the long way math if you don't want to, but you will. The more of these you'll do, you'll be like, oh, that's 0.25, that's 2 points. That's 0.5, that's 4 points. That's 0.75, that's 6 points. Because it's like 2, 4, 6, 8, right? You know, just like that. But this is 2 points. So 2 points is going to be 2% of the loan amount. Does that make sense for everybody? So our loan amount is the $425 times the 80% loan to value. So $340,000 loan times 2% is $6,800. So, and that's why you say, shh. To buy this rate down from 5.25 to 5, Barney would have to write a check for $6,800 on the day he closes this loan to the lender. That's a tough pill to swallow, man. It's expensive. Very expensive. Does that make sense for everybody? I'm not saying does it make sense that he would do it, but do you understand the math behind it? Okay?
So what buyers do this? Because I would think that if they have to pay buyers, I mean, I don't know their credit, but
Right.
I think that they'd be able to shop to just a cheaper interest rate altogether.
Maybe they want it lower than that. Maybe they're getting the best interest rate possible and they want it lower still. They just want to buy the rate down. Some people do. Some people just look at it and they say, no, you know what? I'm nervous. I've got the cash right now. I'm nervous. I want to make sure my house payment is as low as it possibly can be so that if we ever get in a bind, we don't have so much to worry about. I would never do that. You will never see Travis buy a discount point. It seems, to me, it's always seemed crazy. Okay, everybody good with that? And primarily because I just recognize that most people don't keep a loan for 8 years. Even if they stay in the same property that long, they've usually refinanced before 8 years is up. And 8 years is the break-even point with these things. Okay? Why don't we do this? Let's take a break, because we've been going for an hour and a half now. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue with the math here. I'll have to email it to you because I haven't put it together yet. Yeah, I'll email it. I'm going to be emailing it to everybody.
Okay. Is your class that needs a background, will they be doing this chapter next week? Is that right?
They will be doing this chapter next.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm sure will. My class will.